All right, well, we've got our first few hundred attendees in. We'll wait for the others, but let's get things going. So good afternoon to everyone on the West Coast here with me. Good evening for those on the East Coast, and good morning for those overseas that may be listening. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is James Dietrich, and I'm the Robotics Solutions Director here at Fresh Consulting. And I'll be the moderator for our discussion on why robotics companies fail and what can be done to make more succeed. Hopefully everyone listening has had an opportunity to download and read our white paper. But if not, I think you're still going to get a lot of value from this conversation, and hopefully you'll have a chance to read it after. To quickly run through some details, all microphone and video functionality for attendees has been disabled. That said, our team will be monitoring a question and answer chat screen, and we're encouraging everyone to pose your questions in there. And at a few points during the discussion, we'll pause and introduce some of those questions to the panelists. We will not be able to get to everyone's question during the webinar, but our team is committed and promises to respond to each of your questions individually after the event. So if you do want us to respond, please make sure not to post anonymously. Separately, we will be recording this event and we will make it available for download shortly after we wrap up. With that out of the way, to help us navigate and work through the many nuances and challenges associated with starting and running a robotics business, we have three really fantastic panelists for today's discussion. First off, I'd like to introduce Andra Kay. She is the Managing Director of the Silicon Valley Robotics Organization. If you've ever been in San Francisco for their robot block party or a Bots and Brews session, it's a great time, and so I highly recommend you go to one of those next time you can. Also with us is Eric Klein, founder and partner at Lemnos Labs. Lemnos is a California-based venture fund that invests in early-stage hardware startups. And lastly is Aaron Prater, head of R&D at FedEx, a longtime customer of many types of robots, and somebody who is just passionate about robots in general. So all of you, welcome. Great to see all of you again, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us for the discussion. I'm just personally really excited for the unique perspectives and insight that each of you is going to bring to this topic. For those who are listening that haven't had a chance to read the white paper yet, our team is, well, let me kind of catch up here. Our team analyzed several robotics case studies from over the past decade and more. And we set out to uncover the many factors and patterns that lead to either success or failure for robotics companies. And in exploring how these factors are interconnected, we uncovered 5 central themes that seemed consistent among failed robotics companies. And those are lacking in business fundamentals, poor market fit and timing, bad user experience and integration, misaligned investors and partners, and focusing on the wrong problem. So to my panelists, I imagine we've got quite a lot to cover today. This is, one of those really open topics where a lot of conversation can come out of it. So to dive right in, let's start with some general comments. What did we miss? What other variables to failure or success, were overlooked by us? Or, are there a few others that we missed that may play a bigger role than we indicated? So Andra, why don't we start with you? Just some general comments after reading the paper.
Well, I love the way you were able to convert what in each case is such a specifically unique occurrence and develop these themes out of them, because I do agree with the themes and they merge. And just speaking about the very first one, lacking business fundamentals, this is one that many founders have talked to me about and said that next time there are some critical things, critical errors that they would not make. And what I've realized is we often think that founders have access to a lot of business information because there's a lot of startup, how to pitch your startup, how to do co-funder agreements, how to divide your equity, how to price your round, all of these areas are really well covered. And it means that we have a much better educated class of startups in this last decade than we previously had. But a serial entrepreneur has been through this several times, and they've gone to the next iteration, which is understanding some of the basic accounting principles, some of the principles about returns, about servicing, about the pitfalls that there really are for young companies that can end up getting in financial trouble through no real fault, just not the ability to make the right choices in a couple of key things. And, you know, with hardware startups, this is also involving supply chain issues. If there's one thing that is not here, it is supply chain problems.
That's great. Thank you for that. Eric, going down the line, why don't you go next?
Well, I think hopefully my esteemed panelists would agree. I think we're entering a sort of a golden age in what I'm going to call applied robotics from the perspective of the technology that we need to use to build applied robotic solutions has never been more affordable, never been more approachable by, you know, traditional hardware developers. You know, high speed, high torque electric motors. 5 years ago, you were looking for custom suppliers and checking each motor for its hand wind. LiDAR used to be Velodyne and it used to be $10,000 a puck. All these technology things that we've talked about, the explosion of sense solutions, LiDAR, every part of the spectrum is now available to be used. Electric motors, propulsion, even battery technology has come along a little bit. We've opened this up from a technology perspective. And I think the real challenge, to the point of you know, why one of the reasons that robotics companies fail or succeed, it has less now to do with the technology. It has, in my opinion, in my experience as a venture capitalist, far more to do with understanding of business fundamentals, of where you're introducing an augmentative or a replacement robot into, the macroeconomics of that environment, the value ecosystem of that environment. And to Andrea's point, understanding how to run a company inside of that. Those tend to be more fatal than the technology in many cases. 5 years ago, this would not have been true. Even 5 years ago, there were so many technology barriers that we have, while not dismissed, lowered. But those business barriers and understanding what the customer is trying to do and integrating into that environment and to their economics tends to trip up a lot of robotics startups.
All fantastic points. You know, on the topic of applied robotics, Aaron, FedEx, I think, is a shining example of a company who has been applying robotics for logistics purposes for many years now. What were some of your general thoughts and takeaways after reading this paper?
I mean, I think you guys did a great job of nailing a lot of the key pitfalls that are out there. And I agree with Eric and Andrea. I think we're starting to enter this whole thing of the technology's there. The technology's very much there, but we are starting to get into the economics and just the people side of how do you apply some of these things. Customer discovery is still something that is really needed out there. We still see a lot of these startups with brilliant minds. I mean, just brilliant people, but they don't fully understand their customers. And that's where they're still having some failures, because they're not fully understanding what are their customers' problems and needs. And then applying that technology that is great, but are you applying it to the right use case or the right application for your customer? And so that's one of the things that we're really big on at FedEx is are you matching things to the right use case? So I think the paper very much nailed a lot of these, and we are exiting the whole, the technology is not there, but are the people there, are the business fundamentals really there now?
I think those are great points. Actually, I received a few emails from people who weren't going to be able to attend today's conversation, but had commented to that effect that customer discovery was something they wanted to see a bit more from in this paper. And I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the challenges we ran into is that, you know, if you look at, you know, lacking in business fundamentals and, you know, solving the right problem and, you know, establishing a user experience, all of this comes back to things that you would uncover in a customer discovery process. And so, you know, part of what this paper, I think, had a challenge is that so many of these themes and so many of these factors are interconnected. They weave amongst one another. And so, yeah, it's great to see things like that emerge as a constant. Andrew, to come back to you, you commented in the paper about a lack of shared vision and other alignment as a key factor in the failure of robotics companies, and that founders need to be far more selective about funding. And I wanted to start here because sometimes I think the investor and the venture world takes a bit too much of the blame for why so many robotics companies fail. Eric, I know you have some opinions on this as well, but Andrew, I was hoping you might be able to expand a little bit for us on your comment there.
Absolutely. Well, I advise a lot of startups around the world, and over again, I break it to them that their conversation with investors, their first conversation, is not just about them answering questions. It needs to be about them asking questions as well. It's a mutual interview. And it is honestly scary that that needs to be said. So I think a lot of startups get into trouble because all they think about is that they need to raise money, and they don't realize that what they need to do is grow their company. And growth, you have to find your partners. And it doesn't mean that some investors are really hands-on partners and some investors are not. And either is fine, but don't expect the wrong sort of behavior from your investor. Do your research, ask the questions, find out what the alignment is, find out what value is coming to the table from both sides of things.
Great point. Eric, I know this was a topic you and I talked about in great detail as well. What's your perspective on the same point?
Well, I'm gonna start with a very simple statement, right? The right amount of venture capital to raise for a robotic startup is zero. Idyllically, a company lives on revenue, right? So coming back to this lacking business fundamentals, I'm excited by a team that is really customer oriented and revenue oriented.
Sure.
Venture capital is capital. It's designed to accelerate the growth of a business. But if there is no business fundamental underneath it, or it's meant to be discovered in real time, we're just going to drive into the fog of war and try to figure out what's out there, that's going to cause a problem. And so from a venture capitalist perspective, I couldn't agree with Andra more. This is it. Your selection of a venture capitalist is a two-way relationship. And for some folks, a serial entrepreneur may say, hey, I know a lot of what I need to do, and what I need is access to capital that doesn't speak a lot. And then there are other folks who maybe it's their first time. They're an amazing crew of mechatronics folks coming out of the best schools on a global basis, right? They're coming out of Waterloo or Tel Aviv or Shenzhen or Sydney. It doesn't matter where you came from. Your mechatronics degree means you can build the product. But the first two risks any venture capitalist is trying to disassemble is primary, engineering risk. And the second equally important one is primary market fit. To Aaron's point, does the customer want it? Does it fit their ecosystem? And by the way, not only does it fit, but does it make economic sense to both parties?
Yeah.
And that knowledge and that discussion should occur with hopefully a good venture capitalist is asking those questions and getting asked questions like, how can I help figure those things out? But if that dialogue isn't occurring, then yeah, like any other relationship, it's probably getting off to a bad start. But I always come from the root of the relationship between venture capital and an entrepreneur is, I agree, it couldn't agree more. It's a two-way relationship. The entrepreneur should be asking the question, how do they get more out of the relationship than they give up in terms of cap table space?
Right.
But inside of that, I quickly go, talk to me about your business. Again, I screen the people and the business first, and almost the technology second. I don't care if there's a parrot inside of a box that's solving the problem, right? Captain Kangaroo could be in there doing it. If it solves the problem and it does it in an economic way that Aaron, as an example with FedEx, if FedEx is happy and the company that put the parrot in the box is happy, and it makes economic sense to both parties. That's great. Obviously, I think we're going to replace that with robotics as opposed to a parrot. But my point being that the root thing is really the customer need and the economics around it. Everything else is either people management or a bit of technology.
I think that's a perfect segue too, that whole idea of market fit, customer need, and the economics, I think dovetails nicely into this trend that we've been seeing so much of recently, where, you know, robotics as a service is kind of leading the way as the desired, you know, pricing model for how people should buy them. Eric, I know you have some comments on this as well. Aaron, I want to bring you back in because, you know, I think you and I have talked about, you know, a few stories where specifically robotics as a service, this pricing model doesn't work for a company the size of FedEx. Help us understand, you know, where there's maybe a balance there, and what is the preferred method for a company like yours?
Yeah, I mean, robots as a service does fit a big part of the market. The question we always come up with when a robotic firm approaches us and they say we do robots as a service and like that's fine for some applications at FedEx. When for our warehousing business, robots as a service makes sense if we're only doing for so many years. We know that's what the contract is for that warehousing customer. But when you start going into the operational aspects of FedEx, if it's at Express, at a FedEx ground facility, at a FedEx freight facility, capitalization is actually more favorable to us, and we can capitalize hardware like crazy. There's huge tax benefits for a large company to capitalize some of these things. Now, I'm not saying that there's not other ways to have a sustained pricing model for some of these startups. But then also when we start talking to some of these startups about this, it's like, okay, when does our volume discounts kick in? Because for a company like FedEx, we're going to be buying a lot of robots. And when we buy any type of equipment, we get volume discounts. I don't care who you are. If we go buy planes from Boeing or Airbus, we get a volume discount. We go to the Daimler to buy our vans, we get a volume discount. So having a startup tell us, oh, well, we don't have a volume discount. It's like, okay, but and this is where I think they get in trouble is you should also assume at any given time, your competitors are talking to us as well. And if they're offering a volume discount, if they're offering us capitalization models and you're just offering robots as a service and a flat fee, we're probably going to go talk to your competitors.
It comes down to know your customer. As we talked about at the start, if you don't understand how FedEx does business, then you've not done the research. And it's essential to understand that. And a great point, Aaron, to understand that your competitors are in the same space and they can move faster if they do better discovery.
Eric, do you have a comment on that as well?
Well, I think this is, you know, I think Andrew made the case of, you know, sort of what does venture do well and poorly. I'm going to say that this is one case where the venture community wants to disagree with Aaron, even though they're wrong. So Aaron makes a very powerful point, which is that some customers, makes a hell of a lot of sense, they want to do expenses on a cap basis. And then some of those expenses are going to be reoccurring, or for instance, maintenance or service contracts or over-the-top pro services. And that's the way FedEx works. There are other businesses, as an example in the restaurant business, much more of an ops-based expenditure model. A dollar comes in and 90 cents of the dollar goes right back out, right? A $100,000 investment in a robotics system doesn't make sense. They don't have access to the same capital basis. Venture, for better or worse, is just completely enamored with the idea of as a service and what's known as ARR or MRR, reoccurring revenue. It's because a generation of venture capitalists came from the software world where Salesforce charges FedEx as a service and FedEx says yes. They just didn't go down the hall to talk to the hardware teams where they're buying physical goods. So again, I think I'm going to glue Andra's point in an interesting way. If you have a VC that's just maniacally focused on telling you the only way I want to see revenue is as a service revenue, and you're making hardware and you're selling to FedEx, you and your venture capitalists have a problem because the only right person in the room is FedEx, right? They're the customer. The customer is always right. And so economic models, as much as the VCs want to contort them so it makes it easier for them to evaluate 9 different startups.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember as the founder that you're running a business first and foremost. You're the majority owner, hopefully.
Right.
And your job is to make the customer happy. And if the customer wants whatever economic model makes sense for you and the customer is the correct answer. So hybrid models end up really being the future for robotics, in my opinion.
I think this is a great opportunity to kind of bring some of our audience questions into the discussion. One we just received was, what are the business models that need to be developed? I think we just started getting into that a little bit. If robotics as a service is one, Andra, Eric, Aaron, what are some other options that you are starting to see in some of the meetings that you're having?
Well, one thing, I'll take a crack at the beginning. The one thing that blows me away about a lot of founders when they come in, they're like, I'm gonna sell the robot to them, whether it's a CapEx or a OpEx expenditure, and that's the spreadsheet. And I'm like, you understand you're making a product that has maintenance, that the customer may want something that's not on the standard sheet, right? They want a feature or a function or a modification, right? I want that thing to be in FedEx's corporate color, right? I want this, I want that. There are so many other elements to how an enterprise hardware business monetizes and creates a relationship. Whatever FedEx needs, they're gonna oftentimes be willing to pay for it as long as it's an acceptable amount. And so really building out a robust business model that handles service, upgrades, lifetime. How long is this going to work, right? What are my service contracts? What are my software licenses? What happens if you go away, right? Does everything go into escrow for me, right? FedEx is going to be around a lot longer than many startups, as an example. Fingers crossed, I think you guys are in a pretty good slot there. But my point being, FedEx has to think in very long windows. Large corporate customers, Caterpillar, Deere, Subaru, Toyota, you have to, I love it when a company, when they talk about a business model, that a founder comes to the table and has said, I've really thought about how enterprises ingest hardware, work with hardware software solutions, and I understand the business models underneath them. Holistic, not just, I'm gonna drop a robot outside the front door of FedEx, and then I'm gonna go running for the hills because they sent me my money. That's not the way this works.
I think there's interesting opportunities for some forms of escrow companies that maintain service. And in fact, some of the consumer robotics companies that folded that were in the study, that was it, service finished. Some of the others did a transition into third-party servers. So there wasn't the complete death. And I think we need to look at some of those models. Eric, absolutely right. The customer is right. What I see a lot of the startups that are succeeding at the moment doing well is because of large corporations who are putting a lot of acceleration, basically having their own R&D labs hand in hand with startups working with them. So first off, the startups at that very delicate stage of very little money are getting a bit of a lifeline, but second, they're getting the education into how their potential customers do business, what's expected, and how to adapt to doing that. And that's really where the learnings are. This works when you've got companies like the size of Target and FedEx. And what we're seeing now is that as those companies are really stocking up a lot on robots, we're getting more into the long tail of the market. And what I hope is that the learnings that move into the market with new robotics companies, I hope they're taking their learnings from the examples with the larger companies rather than the venture model, where the predominant venture model, as Eric said, is ARR, or recurring revenue. And it's been based on a successful history in software that really doesn't apply right now. So everybody needs to update their internal software.
Excellent. Aaron, to bring you back in, something that Andra and Eric have, tied into is, the importance of partnerships here. It's a way to help commercialize. Are there examples in your world of robotics companies that you have partnered with that, can work alongside you for that customer discovery, that testing and learning?
Oh yeah. I mean, at FedEx, we're very much open to any startup. Actually, if I showed you my email basket in basket right now, I have tons of startups that reach out to me.
Sure.
And that's fine. I mean, I welcome it, because just to tell a story of a firm that approached us a couple years ago, they were talking about how to build an ergo suit that they felt would be right up our alley. And we were very interested in them. They had great founders. I mean, these were leading thought leaders in the space of ergo design, ergonomics. And so we thought, yeah, these
it's kind of like an exoskeleton. Is that
like an an exoskeleton. And so when they came to us here in Memphis, they showed us, and it's like, and the first thing my team's like is like, guys, you got the application all wrong. That's not how we handle boxes here. There's our setups are completely different than what you're thinking. And we actually took them out to the Memphis hub. We showed them the application of how the employee does the actual work. And actually, some of them actually jumped into right next to the employee to do the work. And they realized, oh my God, we got this whole design wrong. We totally messed up the how we thought this process was done. And they were able to take that knowledge, go back. It did slow them down a bit, but the whole thing is now they are nailing the actual issue at hand, because they came to Memphis, spent a day with us. We showed them the exact problem, and they actually got to work the exact problem. And then they went back and actually got the right solution. So this all goes back to customer discovery. Is you got to understand what your customers are dealing with, and are you building a solution that they want?
And I want to build on that. There was a question that came up in the thing, and I was reading it, and it sort of ties into this. Is someone asked, well, you know, most robotic startups have 99 engineering positions and 1 business position open, right? Well, you just pointed out the problem, which is that the problem isn't all mechatronics and EE, mechie solved, right? The first composition of robotic startups, a large part early on, is having FAEs, right? To be there with the customer as your robot is going through that, and ops folks to spin up with that. And they're expensive, and you know, it's hard. It creates a bigger company really early on, but that interaction, it's not engineering out in one corner and ops and field support in a different area with 1 or 2 people. No, it's literally all hands on deck understanding customer requirements. And we see it in the VC field all the time, and people under budget it, and they're like, oh, no, we're just going to pour money into engineering. And I'm like, that's great, but you've got it backwards almost. I want to see more people in the field with the customer and less people back doing abstract engineering work.
Got it. Well, to switch gears here just a bit, you know, we spent a lot of time in this paper talking about failure and sort of what leads to failure. But what we didn't do, and purposefully so, was really define what success means for a robotics company. We've heard so far, obviously, you know, unit economics, scalability, the customer discovery. These are all things that lead to a success. But it still feels like an ambiguous statement to call a robot company at this point a success. You know, is it just about profitability and revenue? Is it about having hundreds of robots deployed and a lot of fanfare? Is it the ability to endure and just simply survive longer than one of your competitors? Or, you know, are you considered a success simply because you get acquired? You know, I think we've seen a lot of, you know, examples of that, you know, recently. Andra, I'm curious to get your take on that.
I would say that a Series C funding is a fairly good indicator of success. Perhaps not perfect, but it means you've found product market fit and you're getting extra capital to scale because of large demand for what you're doing. And what is great is that we're seeing companies that have achieved what I would call success in the last 5 years. So it used to be something that would take more like 10 years. And we have kind of responded to the software speed of development to an extent. But if you look at a company like Fetch Robotics, they turned 5 not that long ago. And they're populating a niche that now has a good dozen other companies competing for business in that same spot.
Mm.
Now, interestingly enough, we have seen a lot of the large companies place big bets on the table now. So the first couple of years of deployment, we know there's a lot of trial happening. But once we get past that, then you've got your Symbis, your Bossa Nova Robotics, all of the robots that are going into different aspects, say retail inventory, warehouse logistics. We're starting to see a bit of a wave of mobile picking as well. And it's there's quality control, there's a wide range of jobs available, and we're seeing real signs of success and traction in some of those companies already.
Got it. Aaron, back to you. I mean, what is your and FedEx's definition of success for a robotics company? I think we've touched on little bits of it, but kind of bring us home on the bigger picture there.
Well, I mean, how we measure it is, do we have a successful deployment? Do we have a deployment that is doing what we want it to do? Is it providing value to FedEx? And on the flip side of that is we have a vested interest in the startup being successful as well, because we need them to stick around. We want them to be a successful company, and we want them to continue on. Now, I agree with Andrea. The more funding they're getting and all that, that's a sure sign that they're doing something well. The more deployments they have shows more stability, because that means they're getting more revenue from all their customers. So they're a stable partner. So we're looking internally of, we have a successful deployment. We have a successful robot. This is a startup, a company we want to work with continuing on. But we also want to see that they're growing their own deployment base. They're continuing to have a strong balance sheet. And we encourage a lot of our startups is, don't rely strictly also on us. Okay. It's never a good sign to have a single customer to rely on. And we don't like that either. So even though we will buy tons of these robot applications and deploy them around the world, we don't really always have an interest of, we don't want us, FedEx, to be the sole provider of your revenue, because that's just not a good model to follow as a startup or any type of company. You need to diversify your customer base. And so we actually encourage a lot of these startups of, get out there, expand out. We'll even encourage some of these robot firms to have deployment with some of our own customers. So here in Memphis, we have a lot of these applications are actually at some of these customer locations near us. They're not our deployments, they're the customers' deployments, but they feed into FedEx. But we see that as a very successful thing of, our own customers are buying these applications to keep them successful. So we want to see a strong ecosystem at the end of the day.
Well, I want to come back to that point. Eric, just to have you maybe close off on this topic, Andra obviously believes getting to a Series C is one measure of success. I know you and I talked about, a lot of the acquisitions over the last year and a half, may be a bit of a false signal of success. I'm wondering if you've got some thoughts on that. I mean, we have in the paper where
Andrew and I are not going to be on the same page. I can show you that most robotic startups, their Series C, there's a phrase, the emperor has no clothes.
Okay.
Which is that the money is way in front of the deployments. I think my answer is and I'm not trying to say Andrew's wrong or right. All I'm suggesting is, the question, James, that you posed is one that, when I asked 10 robotics founders what their own metrics of success would be 3, 4, 5 years down the line, they don't know the answer. They'll grab for something like, well, it's the number of robots deployed. And I'm like, well, is that actually the metric? For instance, what if you're a low volume, high dollar robotics company? You can't use a metric like that. Is it the return rate on the robot? There's a lot of different metrics. And I think for each application or each company, the answer as to what is success is different. But knowing that answer is not universal is really important. For some, it's going to be volume. It's going to be the depthness of their sales pipeline. To Aaron's point, it's not just selling to FedEx, but it's selling to every logistics company, right? Agnostically. For another one, it may be service revenue off the initial robot deployment. Every answer is different, but I think I see, from my unique vantage point, that so many founders don't know the answer to it, or they want someone else to tell them what the answer is and chase it. But I always go back to the point, they own the business. So if they don't know the answer, where are they going? It would be like, what if I wake up in the morning, if I don't know where I'm going to go, I'm just going to stay in bed, or I could go do something really stupid. I've got to have a goal and a purpose, and that is the driver. And again, each robotics company should look at that and go, yeah, there are many common ones, but what is your North Star? What is the thing that you're doing that you know as the business owner is going to take you to success, regardless of what venture says or anybody else other than maybe the customer?
Got it. Andrew, I know you've got a response ready. What are your thoughts?
I love Eric's point. I think it's actually far more nuanced than what I was saying. I use Series C as a proxy for number of deployments, because number of deployments is often a closely held secret between the company and the customer. And so if you're outside of those discussions, then that is one of the ways that you can work out how far has that company progressed, you know. And Eric made a great point. The number of deployments isn't necessarily, I mean, there's not that many Da Vinci surgical systems in the world, but there is a heck of a lot of revenue. That's the largest robotics.
I think when you unpeel it, and this is something about venture capital. Venture capital is injected into a company. Robotics companies typically take more money and more time because of the complexity of the solution often to get to deployment. So you can see, and this is more inside baseball, but you can see a Series C company in many other segments should be pretty mature, to Andra's point. In robotics, it often just takes an extra round or two of capital to reach that scale or size where we can just use ventures, growth round capital's sort of metric of success, the stamp of additional rounds, to say that they've reached maturity. And that's, you know, you asked why, you know, one of the reasons it's hard for robotics companies, again, it comes back to sort of maybe not even on this list that I'm staring at, which is they do require a lot more capital. If you look at the first 15 employees in a robotics startup, you're looking at 10 different disciplines that have to come together seamlessly to make Aaron happy. That is, it's expensive, and it's hard to do from a people and engineering management perspective. It's a hard thing that they're doing. It's, you know, if we're talking it in Olympic scale, you're doing a double backflip with a Lutz, right? It's hard, but, and it's going to take some more capital, and that's going to be a drag on the eventual success. But the hope is that if you are successful and you're able to sell to larger customers and a large group of customers either way, that then the scale of the opportunity is commensurate with the challenge and the investment.
Andrew, to come back to you on the point that Eric was just making on sort of the importance of the founding teams. I'm trying to read one of the questions that was posed here. What are the backgrounds and experiences of the founders and robotics team to help ensure success? Make sure I understood that.
I love the sports metaphor. I'm thinking, you know, does that mean robotics is a decathlon in the sense where you actually have to embrace 10 different sports? One of the things that I look for in a founding team, because we always assess startups, not just on their technology or on their business proposition, but also on their team, is do they have somebody who's many dog years old in the industry in which they want to sell? And if they have someone on their founding team, or as early as possible, who has deep domain expertise, sometimes it even comes about, you know, I just completely changed my mind about an agricultural robotics startup when the founder with like MIT, EE, Sci degree said, oh, well, this is the sort of thing I wanted when I grew up on a farm. And I go, okay, you have, again, the deep domain expertise. Having that in the starting team is probably the most critical thing to have. And then for the rest, it is an amazing balance. And I've met individuals who pretty much could do the robotics decathlon themselves. They cover all of those bases. But for the rest, having someone who's very skilled at company management and ops management and team management is probably the most missing link.
Aaron, you've had some comments on this as well, about people who tried to sell to FedEx who don't even have a foundation in logistics and a general understanding of that. Feed off of Andrew there. What's important to you from that perspective?
Well, I mean, with a lot of these startups, I mean, there are brilliant programmers, they're brilliant mechatronics, but as Andrea said, they don't have anyone in the industry that is on their team or even on their board. Mm-hmm. And so then it opens up the question of they're trying to learn what the logistics industry needs, mm-hmm. and they're missing the point. They're missing a key element, because there's only so much you're going to be able to learn by just reading about what companies like FedEx does. Right. And so unless you have somebody, and one of the biggest things I tell a lot of startups, especially those that are the startup team members are still actually in college and all that, is, do you have anyone on your team that has worked one day in a warehouse or one day of unloading trucks or any of these things? And you can find them. I mean, we're all available. That's one of the things I've always opened my door to any of these startups. Just ask general questions, and we will make ourselves available to you. And I don't care which company it is. You'll find someone similar at UPS, DHL, Amazon. The list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. Go find those experts and just pick their brain. Go buy them a coffee. Go buy them a drink. And just pick their brain and make sure that you're actually starting that customer discovery, because I've had too many startups show up on a video call or even in my office, and they say, I got this great idea. And it's like, well, that's great, but that's not how we do this. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, why don't you do it that way? And says, well, we've never done it that way, or there's a regulatory issue, there's this. I mean, this all goes back to customer discovery of just talk to somebody in the industry. I mean, even out there in the Bay Area, there are plenty of logistics people. I don't care where you are you will find a logistics person to talk to.
Hey, James,
but if you could,
can I give you 2 quick examples?
Yep.
Sure.
For those founders. So one of my companies, Dishcraft, Andra knows Linda. Linda made every new employee join the team, had to go and they do dishwashing, commercial dishwashing. She made every new team member go spend a week in the back end of a restaurant washing dishes. It wasn't, if you were coming in as the CPO or an individual software coder, you wash dishes for a week. Another one of my teams, Marble, working with FedEx guys, sent the entire engineering team, not just the FAE, but every engineer who was going to touch a piece of the solution had to ride in a FedEx truck for a subcontractor for a week, and more in some cases, to understand how it worked. And by the way, in that case, that subcontractor was in love with the fact that someone wanted to know how they were doing the work.
Absolutely. I have put startup guys on the line at FedEx. I have made them work pretty much any type of position. So yeah, I got some extra free labor out of that. But the whole thing is, that is a learning experience. Yep. And even if you just do that job for just a couple minutes, it will open your eyes to what is the problem and how can you address it. So get that experience. I don't care at that point. I don't care if you have an MS from MIT in mechatronics, you're the smartest. If you can't understand the problem at hand, you're never going to solve it for me.
Well, let's kind of hang there for a minute, because I feel like what's closely associated with this customer discovery and understanding is also understanding what the return on investment needs to or should look like for a customer or, a startup model. What are examples of, ROI calculators or, other models that are available, for people to use when trying to help uncover what that appropriate ROI should be?
Well, I'll take that because we've had startups come to us and saying, okay, this is my solution. This is what it would produce for you on productivity. And, oh, by the way, here's my pricing model. And then we look at it and says, there's no ROI here. And they don't get it. And it's like, well, you could have gone to the Department of Labor and looked up how much a hourly employee doing this job costs. And then it's just apply it to the back of the napkin, guys. And if you're not doing that basic research into what is the true labor costs in our industry, then you're already missing a key part. Because when you present it to us and we run our numbers, we'll run the numbers right there in front of you. And if we can't find an ROI, we're in trouble. And we're going to send it back to you saying, okay, fix this.
Yeah.
That's it. A lot of startups are startup centric, and they think that capital is going to solve their problem and that customers are going to solve their problem, instead of going, how am I solving your problem?
Well, and so Andrew, let's pause there. I mean, what Silicon Valley Robotics, represents is, a group of companies all trying to march towards innovation and commercialization successfully. You represent a huge number of those, and I feel like something we didn't really capture well enough in this paper is the perspective of the startup founder. As somebody who engages with these people all the time, help us kind of bring their perspective into this discussion a little bit. What are we missing that they would want to be, sharing with us today?
Well, sometimes it is just that experience to flip the script. And, their job as the CEO of a founder of a startup is to solve all the startup's problems. But in the process of doing so, they have to solve someone else's problems. I do startup workshops all the time. I provide mentorship, advising to accelerators around the world and to startup founders. And so often their pitch is, let me show you what I can do, as opposed to, let me show you how this is going to help you improve your operations, give you greater return on investment, solve these problems that I'm aware that you're having. So it really needs to be the ability to think both of how do they manage themselves, their startup, and how do they solve someone's problems. And a lot of them excuse themselves by saying, well, we're still trying to find out where our customer market fit is, but they need to adopt that way of thinking right from the start.
Got it. Something that came in from an audience, question earlier was really around, how to, build effective, partnership networks, whether that's an integrator, reseller, what do you advise to startups who are looking to establish a network of successful partners, Andrea?
Again, know your ecosystem. There are so many. Here's another pitfall from a very early startup perspective, is assuming that nobody else is in the field because you haven't found them. Whereas I have the experience of hearing many of those companies pitch that particular problem solution and then fail. So sometimes some of the best experience I have, and I think this is where your investor can be a great source of wisdom, is just knowing how many other people have failed to successfully solve that problem, And I noticed there was a question in the chat about how do you protect your IP when you're going out and doing these partnerships and discovery process. I'm like, forget your IP at that stage. Truthfully, IP is only useful when you've got a lot of money and a lot of lawyers. And until you reach that point, you just need to be solving someone's problem first, foremost, and fastest.
I want to build on this statement. One of the failings that I see a lot, and it's very solvable, and I think both Aaron and Andrew have talked about it, is, do you understand your value ecosystem? So you may come in and say, hey, FedEx, I have a robot that does this. And I can sit in the background and go, well, that's got a service addressable revenue of about this much in totality across the entire globe. If you had every customer at X percentage capture. But you need to understand everything that's adjacent and around you, because you may need to draw on them. You may end up competing with them over time. You may draw on them as a partner, but you need to understand, as an example, we always say in logistics, can you map a single dollar moving through the logistics ecosystem? Follow the package, by the way. It doesn't magically teleport itself to Memphis and teleport its back. It gets on 5 different trucks, 4 different vendors potentially. If it's going to cross different boundaries, where does it go? What's in the packaging itself? You have to understand the entire ecosystem, whether it's an agriculture environment, logistics, manufacturing. and understand your part of the dollar that's being spent to move the unit item. And if you don't understand that, you could be boxing yourself in, or as importantly, missing a bigger opportunity that's very close to what you're doing, or what competitive or cooperative forces you're engaging in that ecosystem. But so many people go, I have a widget that can articulate, pick up a thing, and move it 6 inches. And I'm like, that's great, but how does it fit in to something so that you can unlock real value? So understanding your ecosystem as a founder is as important as understanding the thing that you're doing within the ecosystem.
And looking for cooperative opportunities. A lot of startups are very defensive, very precious, around wanting to own the whole of the stack. You know, they're translating this into pitch terms into, well, we'll control this, 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 and this, and that's going to give us greater advantage in the market. But the reality is the customers that you are looking for at this stage are often very large and are often talking to other people. And if you have a different power outlet to everybody, well, that's currently one of the issues. Are you compatible just in basic terms? You know, and some of the things that people are trying to protect at the moment, their maps, for example, that's going to move away from being something that you get to own. You're going to have to cooperate. You're going to have to integrate. And that can be, you know, embrace that opportunity to standardize what you can and cooperate with who might be the market leaders, because it is not a race in which you are the only competitor.
I always love the example in agriculture where a lot of robotics companies go into ag and say, I'm going to service my own equipment. I'm like, have you ever taken a look at John Deere's pro forma? 30% of their revenue comes from sales and support. They built a network 100 years ago to take care of those tractors. Why do you want to try to tell the farmer that your piece of equipment is the only one that's going to get serviced only by a technician, but by the way, means you got to build a network all over America versus leveraging something that's there. So again, partnerships and VARs and SIs and suppliers and stuff, so important, right? Versus maybe even sometimes the VC telling you, go vertical, go vertical. I'm like, no, look at the market before you make blanket statements.
Yeah. Everyone, I want to be conscious of the time we have left. This has been a fantastic discussion to kind of sort of head towards the end here. I want to be leaving everyone who's listening with some real, you know, positivity on the future of robotics. You know, I've got some questions here that I do want to make sure we address, like what is the appetite for, you know, consumer robotics from the VC community? Where do we see opportunities in the world of construction? Aaron, I'll start with you to maybe sort of wrap us up here. You know, what are you most excited about right now? What are some, you know, robotics companies or certain types of use cases that you're following that are, you know, leaving you with a lot of hope?
Well, I think this is going to be the start of the golden age of robotics. I think coming out of COVID, there's going to be huge opportunities. Right now, I think there's a lot of short-term pain going on right now because a lot of companies are still trying to figure out the damage coming out of COVID. Right. So there are some discouraging signs right now. And that's just so companies can sort of feel out of, okay, where are we? Where are we going? How is everyone still intact kind of stuff? But as soon as all those answers start getting answered and we start seeing the path out of COVID, I think you're going to see a huge ramp up in robotic applications across the board. I think the need is there now, that we need robots across numerous industries right now for social distancing, for the continuing decline in the workforce as the baby boomers finally exit the workforce. And we're going to have needs across numerous industries. So I think this is the best time to be starting a robotics firm. But the whole thing is you've got to also make sure you're nailing what your customers need. And as we exit COVID, the customer needs, we're going to be very specific in what we're going to target early on in this. And if you're listening to your customers, you will have successes. And so that's the biggest thing I want to pass on to those startup companies that are out there listening to this is it's going to be tough for a little while as we're exiting, but I think we're going to see a boom in numerous applications. I've been following numerous companies outside of logistics, and I think there's just going to be just some amazing stuff coming out, but just, you have to listen to your customer of what they want.
I think that's going to be one of the enormous takeaways from today. Aaron, obviously you've commented on it. Eric, you've commented on it. The customer is always right. They are the end all be all to success or failure for your company, it sounds like. Andra, I want to pose the same question back to you. What are you hopeful for? Who in the SBRO world is looking promising, coming to market with a great model, great concept? Give us some closing thoughts.
Well, I'm privileged to have seen so many of the first wave of amazing robotics companies, from Dishcraft and Linda Poulier's an amazing serial entrepreneur, to companies like Fetch, Simbi. There are more than I can list, and they cover everything from exoskeletons to mobile robots to picking solutions to airborne robots and space robots. There is not an industry sector out there that is not about to embrace robotics. And we've seen the first signs of that. Robotics is out of the factory now. Eric said there's never been a better time to do robotics because the tech stack has just dropped in price so significantly. But the second half of that, the market has just, and it's been fascinating seeing the interest level in robotics ramp up as a result of COVID. Now, maybe people aren't able to action much on that at the moment because there's so much that's critical in their business, but the interest level in robotics has gone through the roof, and there is not an industry that is not going, every industry is going to benefit from new robotics technologies. So this is the golden age of robotics.
Fantastic. Eric, I don't mean to maybe sort of, structure your closing remarks too much here. We had a couple questions in the queue around the importance of, pivoting, once or twice really early on. We're being asked, the general sort of VC appetite for robotics in the consumer space. Are there some general comments that you'd like to make in those categories?
Really quickly, consumer, it's like an iceberg right now. Consumer and robotics and consumer in general, venture investing in consumer is very, very low. It's a 10-minute answer why, but just understand if you're going to try to bring robots into consumer space right now, tough road to hoe in a lot of cases. Not universal, but in a lot of cases right now, and that's endemic to consumer. I would just pass 2 tips on real quick to the founders that are on this call.
Yeah.
Aaron said something 5 years ago. My business partner and I, Helen and I, started looking through BLS data. The government told us 5 years ago that this was going to happen. And all the data you want in terms of understanding markets, the government does a lot of it for free. So if you've never explored, just start with BLS. It's like going into a giant rabbit hole. But it's the rabbit hole of knowledge that started us 5 years ago into a deep investment cycle in first wave robotics. The second thing I would say is everybody on this, every panelist here just said to you, our doors are open. Don't be an island as a robotics founder. The answers to a lot of your questions have already been asked and in some cases solved by someone else in the community. You're not alone. Pick up the phone. Aaron will probably answer. I'm going to answer the phone. Andra knows 20 people who answer the phone. We have answers. We'll get you on the truck. We'll get you on the farm. We'll get you the BLS data. We'll help you make it there. The only thing that we have between the 3 of us as panelists is collective scar tissue from having done this for a while.
Well,
I want you to make spectacular mistakes. Don't make the silly mistakes I made as an entrepreneur for 20 years. Make a new spectacular one. Network in the robotics community. You'll find answers to some of these questions.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, we've definitely received some audience feedback that, they're looking for a bit more positivity. They're looking for a bit more hope and advice. I think that's a wonderful way to cap it off.
I've
There
been
are
scrolling
who
through
wanna-
these questions. Fresh knows the answers to these questions. Unfortunately, an hour can't answer them, but we know some of the answers to these questions. Just ask us and we'll point you in the right directions.
Couldn't agree more. We are at time. I want to give all of you a real big thanks for today. If there's, you know, a website or an event coming up or something that each of you would like to promote, now's your opportunity. Andrea, do you have anything that you'd like to maybe plug for our audience here?
Absolutely. We've just launched a new series and it's called Society, Robots and Us. We're going to be having the first 1 hour discussion. I call it the conversations we need to have. And our first discussion will be Tuesday coming up, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And our topic is going to be on the current political climate. We're going to talk about robots and racism. And I have some amazing speakers lined up already for this. And I'm hoping that every couple of weeks, we're going to explore another of those social issues that as roboticists, we need to have those conversations. And we can bring together some fantastic thinkers, and I'm just looking forward hugely to it. Hope you're going to join me.
That sounds fantastic. We'd love to join. If you would want to share the links and anywhere where people can register to that, we'd be very happy to share that with everyone who joined with us today. Thank you again for being a part of this. Eric, some closing thoughts or remark?
I always say I'm at lemnos.vc. I'm Eric. You can probably figure out my email address, and my door is open to you as someone in the robotics industry. If I can help with my experience, expertise, and connections, let me know how I can help you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aaron. Before you go, I would just like to say a big thank you to FedEx during this time. I know that my online ordering has certainly, you know, quadrupled during this time. So to everyone that you work with, all of your colleagues, everyone in the warehouse, please extend a big welcome and thank you for all of us. Anything that you'd like to plug or leave us with?
Well, actually, this is my first webinar to kick off 3 weeks of webinars. Actually, next week I am doing a webinar through the RIA, the Robotics Industry Association. Next Wednesday, I will be sharing the virtual stage with representatives from AutoGuide, Mir, Locust, Otto, and Waypoint. Great group of guys from the AMR industry. So please check that out. And then actually the following week after that, I'm actually giving a presentation through Robo Business Direct, where I'm actually going to talk about how in the logistics space, how companies are failing and succeeding and how FedEx looks at that. So we'll take a deeper dive into some of the issues we talked about today, more geared towards the logistics industry. But I really encourage, if you really like what you saw here today with this great panel, to tap into that one. That's going to be in 2 weeks with Robo Business Direct. And I will be going into deep dives into where we see successes and failures in logistics for robotics.
Fantastic. I think that's an excellent way to close. You know, if nothing else, you know, today's conversation has certainly shed the light on the fact that this conversation is not complete. There's a lot more that we need to go deeper on. Thank you all again for being here. I think this was a huge contribution to the topic. You can certainly expect more of these types of webinars from Fresh and from our group. We care so deeply about these topics. So expect more from us in the future. And until then, please stay safe, please stay healthy. And thank you all for you know, helping to make the future of robotics great. So have a wonderful day and we'll speak to you all again soon.
Thank you all. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.